I'd like to call upon the president and founder of the IDC, Professor Uriel Reichman, to present and introduce the next speaker. Professor Reichman. This is not only an introduction of the next speaker, but the closure of a circle and an event that is of great importance for the IDC. Professor Yaffa Zilbershats, the next speaker, currently serves as the chair of the Planning and Budgeting Committee, which is the central non-political role in the entire Council for Higher Education. As you all know, the IDC has been trying for years to get full recognition based on its achievements alone. And we fought for every degree, and for 8 years we've been fighting to have a genuine discussion over our request to confer PhD degrees. We were stopped for 24 years. The one to break through the gates for us, the gates of Gaza, we needed a new Samson. In this case, a woman Samson. And that person, with the help and cooperation of Minister Bennett, is Professor Yaffa Zilbershats. And so before I continue with the introduction, I would like on behalf of the IDC to thank you for this courageous step against opposition from all kinds of interested parties and for standing bravely based on an understanding of academic justice and integrity that led to this decision. She deserves a round of applause. Professor Zilbershtats is a professor of law. For 3 years, she has served as the chair of the Planning and Budget Committee of the Council for Higher Education, and she's the first woman to hold that position in the history of the State of Israel. And the opening of that university cartel, as it were, is one of the most important roles she took upon herself, most difficult roles she took upon herself during her term. And she also determined certain rules in the area of financial responsibility among budgeted academic institutions. Less than a year ago, Professor Zilbershats said in an interview with a newspaper that we need to create a system that will make it possible to think differently. And that's exactly what we're doing here in the IDC. As an Israeli Zionist institution of higher education, we educate to original thinking based on the ideas that you lead in general, of a redefinition of the social sciences, of the new interdisciplinarity, not only among the social sciences, but between brain science, technology, engineering and big data, and social sciences. And we share your approach regarding the training of leadership with social commitment and entrepreneurship in Israeli society. I can say that we talked about it outside, we work hand in hand based on great appreciation for women's leadership. Professor Zilbershats is a highly admired jurist. Her expertise is in international and constitutional law and human rights and immigration. Her work includes the writing and editing of a number of books and chapters in books and academic papers and representation of the Academy, Bar Ilan University at the time, at international conferences. And she is not only an academician and a leader, she also served in 2 leadership roles in the Academy. She was the Dean of the Law School of Bar Ilan University, after which I think for 15 years she was Vice President of Bar Ilan University, and was involved very strongly in the big changes that occurred in the university. Throughout her career, Professor Zilbershats has also been involved in public activity, in contributing to society. She served on public committees, including a committee that was very sensitive regarding citizenship law, the Rubinstein committee to determine immigration policy, the Ne'eman committee regarding the drafting of a constitution, a subject we've been involved in for many years, and I hope that one day Israel will have a constitution, and also served as on the executive committee of the Jewish Agency. Among her many activities on the international level, she was Vice President of the International Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, and consulted to that organization, was also a member of the executive of the Israel Democracy Institute, and the former chair, Professor Arik Carmon, is here with us today as well. I would like to thank you. I would like to express our deep admiration and appreciation for your position, which was not an easy one, and for bringing about the situation where the issue was resolved. And I look forward to productive cooperation between us and the Council of Higher Education. Professor Yaffa Zilbershats.
Thank you very much, Professor Reichman, and I really do feel that this is a tremendous privilege. I'm also quite moved because the task I've taken on myself is somewhat of an impossible mission impossible. I always say that it's easier for me to establish a university rather than actually having to press the buttons for the technical buttons for these slides. But I do believe this is a tremendous privilege for me that I have been awarded to be here. Thank you very much, Professor Reichman, for your generosity of spirit and for working so beautifully together. But this is truly, yes, part of our national strategic thinking, and I'd be delighted to share with you the challenges that we face. I will talk about the reality and how I interpret it and see it, and what our criticism of it is, and where we want to actually head towards. Reality has taught us that this is a system of 62 schools of higher education, 20 colleges, some budgeted by the government of Israel, and the tuition fees are similar to in the universities, 12 that are not budgeted. In other words, like in the IDC, that these institutions wherein there is still the supervision from an academic point of view of the Council of Higher Education, but are not budgeted by the government. And the same like happened with the seminars, teaching seminars, they have that supervision, but without the counseling. As you can see, in the past, we had 21 institutions in the past. In the year 2013, 67 institutions. In other words, something happened, and what actually happened is embedded in what happened with this college sort of law. So in our strategy, the system is big enough for what we need, and we don't think that we need to open additional institutions over the next few years. In fact, we believe that this 67 could go down to sort of around the 50s. Those of the weaker ones could perhaps unite and merge with the others in order to bring something much more fundamental and significant. The number of students in the Higher Council for Higher Education, so we're talking about over 300,000 in that system. Many of those for first degrees, bachelor degrees, but in the next slide, we'll see a great deal more. In the next slide, we can see that when there were only 20 all those years ago, for bachelor degrees, there were, at the time, without the Open University, 55,000 students. And I'm talking about all the universities without the Open University, in other words. Now we have over 200,000 for bachelor degrees, which teaches us a great deal. It teaches us, in fact, that it's not only the increase and the growth of the population, but there was also a breakthrough in the making accessible of universities and actually making it accessible for people. Because you can see that such a high percentage of that potential for those, and these 200,000 represent a much bigger number, 50% of the actual average of those who are potential students. So in other words, it's not only the number of institutions enabled the higher education to be something much more accessible and much more extensive. An additional datum here that I think is of fascinating. In 1990, 55% of the students were studying and were studying actually in the universities, and 15% in the colleges. So I'm going to now go on towards 2017, 40% start in the universities, 60% are in the colleges. It's a new system, even if it's not budgeted, even if it is a system of colleges, which really challenges this whole issue of teaching, academic teaching. And I promised Uriel Reichmann that I wanted to say that those that are not budgets, they are basically breathing down the necks of our budgets, and it is very important that they should be sponsored and by the government's budgets, but alongside that, we need to have some kind of reciprocal system between the government and the universities and this whole budget issue. Who studies? That is the ideal. On the right-hand side, the ideal is that it should be identical percentage of those into the actual. In other words, it will reflect the actual situation in the population. Every year, we knew that in 2018, there are 17% of Arabs in higher education. In the Technion, there's 21% of Arabs in equivalence to their fraction of society, to their part of society. It doesn't always happen. With the Haredis, it does not happen, and the same with those of Ethiopian extract, it doesn't happen, and we would like it to be equivalent to their part in their proportionate part of society. Now, another issue that was not dealt with throughout the years is what is the position and the standing of foreign students. At the moment, we are a quarter of the average of the OECD. We are not receptive sufficiently. If we want us to excel as we have done up to now, then we have to relate to that. We have to be much more welcoming to foreign students, and in our 5-year plan, we are working on that. Here you can see that little 1.4%. It's really, I would say that it is really, the slice of this pie is definitely not sufficient, and we need to work on those of Ethiopian extract as well. Now, have a look at the women. I deliberately wrote it in red. There is a majority of women in all the degrees, especially, for example, the 63% in PhD. But it is still not sufficient because there is a bias, because we can see that so many of the women actually learn the paramedical topics and teachers, and unfortunately, they do not go for the actual hard sciences, physics, computer sciences, and there we do not have a female majority, and they are necessary in the high tech. So therefore, we need a revolution that will lead women into those domains of sciences, etc. So we are doing well, but we need to get to the level of excellence here. So I think grosso modo I described the system as is, and now I would like to take this system and look at it with a kind of critique according to these following parameters. The whole system of higher education are responsible for teaching, research, and that is the way it should be, and the actual implementation of it. But do we have something additional to work about, not just the teaching and the research? Well, let us first start with a critique of our teaching. So many things have changed in this modern world, tremendous speed. But unfortunately, the teaching in higher education has not changed enough. Still, we have a frontal professor. Perhaps instead of chalk, he's got something else in his hand. But even so, this whole digitization and the internet is not inherent within the teaching system. And that is something that one needs to be really voice an opinion on and change. And you can see that the age of those who are students, they've usually, after their army service, perhaps in the United States, they're a bit younger. But true, I think it would usually be 20-year-olds are really here. And here in the world of high tech and outside, do we need to adhere to this reality? Can't we change things and shake it up a bit? This internationalism also has to really be shaken up a bit. So what are we really teaching? And Professor Reichman actually hinted to that. They're just the conventional degrees, or are we looking at the greater ecosystem instead of thinking about BAs till you're 25 and then do your masters and then do your PhDs, and then you suddenly see this ecosystem that is totally different? Let us try and shake up that paradigmatic way of thinking. Shouldn't we throw down a gauntlet of challenge? What are we doing with just teaching? Is that what motivates us? Shouldn't we talk about other things and the research and what else should be propelling us forward? Don't we have additional duties to fulfill and not just teaching? So I believe, and in this Council for Higher Learning, I believe that teaching must actually tally with the internet and digitization. This must change. It must move on to a new phase. Now, how can this be achieved? Well, we have to create courses where you use these tools. I mean, if you can do remote learning, you can listen to a lecture by Professor Chehanover. If you live in Eilat and he's actually in the Technion, it should be much more extensive. But why can't we use these tools in the classes as well? And this will change perhaps the duration of the actual degree. We in Israel want to change it all, and we believe that the wisdom is not all here. So we connected and fused with MIT and Harvard. It's called edX, EIG, and we joined the ranks of that international data, which is a fantastic venture, and there various immunology courses on the history of Islam, and there's so many, a plethora of them. And we see that now through the internet, the light is actually coming from Zion on this. So we've created a platform with the collaboration of Israel Digital in the Council for Higher Learning and other ministries. And this platform is called Campus, and they're going to be online. We're going to have various courses. And of course, this will enable remote learning and accessibility at levels that we cannot even imagine. We'll be able to soar with this, and will change the quality of the teaching on the campuses. And undoubtedly, I think in about 10 years' time, and perhaps even earlier, there will definitely be an impact on the duration of one's degree studies. The teacher and the chalk is also the passive student as opposed to the active student. He comes, he learns, and that's it. But what happens at the age 21, and Naftali Bennett, the Ministry of Education, always says it, that he'd started his startup at the same time as studying law, and suddenly you have an idea. You're on the cusp of achieving something great. There's a wonderful ecosystem that you can join the forces of. There are jurists that you can join on IP issues. You can actually talk to other people. Why not take advantage of this entrepreneurship, this wonderful spirit of the student, and do so up in a topsy-turvy manner, that he can actually, there are ideas floating around. Why not? Actually, it doesn't have to be in that order. So here there's a wonderful idea that actually comes and dictates to us that the entire time that you're on the campus will actually be shortened, because you can learn and study on internet courses as well, and it'll become actually, and the focus will also be the activities of the student. Then he shouldn't be disconnected during that period from all those ideas that he could be developing. So have a look at the people who are actually studying, even that gentleman, and even the man with the actual walker frame and walking stick, and the older people. It should be open. I mean, just look at this diversity. We want to see the Ethiopians. We want to see the elderly people. We want to see the Haredis. We want to see the student that came from London, and we want to see the Arab women. We want to see the minorities, the young people, the secular. We want to see this amalgamation and this crucible here of all of them melting together and working together. Let us think differently. Let us think that if we study engineering, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't study literature as well. Let us understand that if we study literature or history, we will not be able to create these disciplines and make them stabilized, and without them learning skills in computer sciences as well, because the whole transfer of this knowledge and this data is dependent on it. You can even scan the whole Geniza, for example, all those wonderful archives in Cairo. So you can use it, exhaust the potential of this fusion as this merging. We have to leave that little box behind us, that little thinking box, use it as a think tank, and expand and spread our wings. And of course, at the Budgeting and Planning Committee in the Council of Higher Education, they're all partners in the humanities and in the other sciences, computer sciences, inter alia. Research is always the temple, the sacred, the most holiest of holies for the academe. That is something that should never be detrimentally affected. But you have to understand that basic research, even its sanctity that must be retained, does not negate the existence of a world outside it. One needs to relate to this world outside it, and even this internal sanctity in the hands of the researcher does not negate partnerships. And let us see it now. This is how we can actually sort of symbolize it. Here they're doing the same work, but they can also ask questions that are reverted towards them from the outside, and they can actually think how this will impact the outside world. Let's have a look how we did it. So those researchers, for example, let's say a whole group, not as an individual, they start publishing data. Some of them will perhaps, yes, confirm and approve their specific research works, but perhaps the moment they send it to the outside world, perhaps their material, their treasure trove, will be a treasure trove for someone else who's thinking about other things. Now, if they retain it all in their computers and sort of isolate themselves, but if they feel that there's no fear in actually sharing things, because this would only actually fertilize other ideas. It'll be a cross-fertilization, then perhaps I'll think about it. There's no fear of sharing. If this will lead us to other worlds, and we must dare, it's incumbent upon us that we dare and think in different ideas, because this is the future of the higher education. Now this, if you have a look at this, if we think about the various topics of the future, then we can see them all as released in the direction of a cloud of information for the benefit of all the topics that exist and all the researchers and industries. But alongside that, there is an unavoidable world that is being created, which will lead us into the future, and that is the world of data. We have to take it into account that we have to develop the computer sciences and this intelligence issue and the big data issues that are in the depth of the computer sciences, because they should be prioritized because they impact everything.
Not only mathematics and medicine. I'm going back to the slide we saw earlier, and I want to relate to the third floor. It's not just the nature of research and the questions, but there's an even more important question. Am I bringing the industry into the campuses? The very big question. There was a lot of fear of this, but the world is going in another direction. The universities, the research institutes understand that if they don't do their research in cooperation with the industry, they'll lose something. And that's why in Israel, too, there are already initiatives, one of which we have already authorized, that enables the industry to enter the institutes of higher education, to bring its people into work alongside the researchers, to bring synergy to the new world. And of course, the last thing, the third task, I've given the vision. The third task, which had a question mark, is here now with an exclamation point. Yes, large institutions will go outside into restaurants, music departments, into the public, into auditoriums. They are not only for students from the age of 21 to 25. We have to think about the impact they can have on the community as a whole. Every institution has its own nature, its own priorities, and it can take those things and bring them to the outside world. Judaism can be an agenda of one institution, contributing to national security, developing industry, social development. These can all be the priorities of different institutions, and they need to take these subjects alongside their regular tasks of teaching and research. That, in my opinion, is the future, to learn throughout life with students from all over the world, online learning with diverse populations, with a training for subjects, but very broad education, personally adapted medicine, quantum physics, the databases, sharing data, to do basic research, to work with the industry, to relate to the institutions within the community, and to see this whole world in new, vivid colors. And now I'd like to conclude with, to counter something I myself said. I've made you enthusiastic about the new things, but I'd like to take you one step back with caution. I believe very strongly in everything I've said, and these are not dreams, these are things that we are working on and are coordinated about, and with the institutions and with the appropriate budgeting, and these things are actually being done. But at the same time, the academic world is a world that is very critical, and it is also that should teach us humility. And I have to say that all these things that we need to do in order to bring the institutions of higher education into the 21st century, we need to do them also alongside the question of whether we are not neglecting the existing situation. In other words, we have to bear in mind that with all the changes and with all our need to adapt ourselves to the new ways of learning and the industry and the new worlds, still, what gives the resilience, not just national resilience, but deep resilience, is knowledge. And knowledge at its basis is driven by curiosity and not by what it achieves. There's research in Google and Facebook and all those big companies, and it's okay. Perhaps we don't need institutions of higher education. Perhaps we can learn everything online. But I say no. The interaction of learning in a campus is super important. We have to change it and underscore it, but we have to maintain the enormous commitment to what we call basic research that is driven by curiosity and not expediency, because that what creates the new developments without any goal of profit or expediency, and that gives us, that's what moves knowledge ahead, and knowledge is strength. Thank you.